Look, some of these are furry and colorful, others are hard. Millipedes have weird bodies. This thing has a long neck. Look at the fat legs on this wasp and these eyes on stalks. Just marvel at the diversity of arthropods just for a moment here. You don't get this opportunity every day. Yeah. This is the world that I have spent my life fascinated by. I spent 40 years now, absolutely enamored with all of these critters and learning everything I can about them. Today I'm going to be talking about the nocturnal ones. So let's get started on that. Whenever we talk about bugs, a lot of people, if you were to draw a bug, a sketch of one, you'd probably draw something that had eyes that looked a little like this. We're used to insects that have uh, large eyes and can see quite well, or at least we think they can. But the fact is that these are actually pretty rare exceptions. Um, just I mean, as I'm talking here, I'm sort of getting distracted looking at how cool these photos are. Anyway, yeah, most of us think of these as the standard, but actually, most arthropods can't see very well. Most don't have eyes like this. And in fact, even the ones that do have eyes like this, many of them can't see well either. I'll just give you an example. Here is a, oops, something is, there we go. Here's a picture of the face of a tarantula. Just to orient you here, these are the large chelicerae, the jaws. Here are some little leg-like structures called pedipalps. Here's the sort of head area, if you like. Anyway, here are 8 eyes, all wrapped up in a little ball there. And look at that. There's one eye right here. This is the status of most arthropods in the world. They either have no eyes at all or these small little eyes that are not capable of forming images. My point is, even in the daytime, many arthropods are maybe not subjected to darkness, but many of them are not seeing in the vast array of beauty that you and I see in. Most of them have a much less they have a much less broad visual spectrum, and as a result, they use other sensory structures to sense their environment. Things like hairs, sense olfactory organs, and stuff like that. I'm just going to talk about one example in the spider world: webs. So webs are used for many reasons to detect things like airflow and all kinds of things like that. They're built by spiders that typically can't see or form images at all. I'm about to show you a video of an orb web being constructed. And I just want you to imagine this is constructed by a creature that isn't really seeing anything as it's doing it. It's at night, so it's definitely not perceiving any visual data, and yet it's constructing this web. I'm just going to play it once so you can see it here. It's sped up, obviously. Yeah, look at that. Okay, I'm going to play it again, but this time I'm going to talk a little bit more about what's happening there. This spider is building these radii, the spokes of the wheel of this orb web, and then it's going over those radii with a circular web. That's the sticky part, and it's making that sticky part of the web that is the circle part. So here, let's take a look at that one more time. There's the radii, and then it's going through and building that spiral bit. That's the sticky part that catches prey. And then the spider sits at the middle of the web called the hub with its feet on various parts of the web, and that's how it senses. Every time something hits that web, the spider can feel it using pressure sensors on the knees, and will go catch that prey item. Pretty cool. Web construction is a really interesting topic. Spiders will spin webs of various heights to catch certain prey and various shapes to catch certain prey. The shape of the web, the position of the web is all governed to target a specific prey item, a moth, a certain kind of aquatic insect, flies, one moth that maybe flies high and fast at the tops of trees, maybe small moths that are only flying near the ground, and so on and so on. And there's loads of different sizes and shapes of these things. Webs are really cool. I could talk about them for far too long, but I'm just going to move forward and talk about one of my favorite stories. And this is my first story of the evening. This is going to be how my talk goes. I'm just going to scattershot fun stories and hopefully we'll enjoy our time together. Okay, so this first one is of a barn spider. Barn spider is a colloquial name that we all use for several species of spiders that live in our backyards in this area in eastern US and elsewhere, I suppose. By far the most common species we have here is this one. It's called Neoscota crucifera. You could just say barn spider, even though there are a couple other species that are also barn spiders. The reason that I want to talk about this one is it builds an orb web, and it builds an orb web that catches moths, but it builds an orb web that catches moths, and unlike many other spiders that will just build a web and then repair it as needed, this one builds a new web every night. What that means is that every morning it must take that web down. How does it take it down? It eats it. So this spider spins a web every single night, is purely nocturnal, active only at night, and then consumes that web in the morning. Now, it may catch some moths or flies or something in that web. It might. And in that case, it's getting its full protein, usually from those prey items. But here's the interesting part. It's not really storing any food. So actually, it's reclaiming a lot of that protein and lost energy from the web itself in order to make the new web that night. And here's my favorite part of the story. It turns out that these spiders actually get 25 to 40% of their daily dose of protein frequently from wind-blown pollen. And that's just a fact that I just think is so cool. These spiders that we think of as purely predaceous, only eating insects, actually that web that is there for catching prey and is so carefully tuned to it is also allowing it to be omnivorous. Pretty cool. Moving on. Not all spiders use webs at all. Many spiders use other means of catching prey. Wolf spiders are infamous for this. They have two of their eyes are enlarged, and the sensors of those eyes are extremely tuned in to low light situations. It's worth saying that if you notice, these spiders have 8 eyes, so they've got 4 down here. These eyes can't see almost anything. They see lights and darks and other things, but no images. They have other eyes that are back here, sort of out of view. And then these are the big eyes I'm talking about. These are the eyes that are really modified for sensing at night. But how? It turns out that they do something that cats and dogs and deer do, some other things, and that is that they've coated the inside of their eye with a mirror finish so that light that comes in may hit that receptor, may hit the retina, but actually it bounces around a whole bunch within the eye and gives that retina many opportunities to pick up information. That feature is called a tapetum, and we use the same name in spider biology that we use in cats and dogs. Tapetum just means that mirror finish to the eyes. And the fun thing about these is you can actually see this in your backyard. If you hold a flashlight up to your eye, you can shine it over your yard, and the spiders that are looking at you, only the ones that are looking at you, you can see their eyes shining back at you. Pretty cool. This feature of them allows them to pick up more light and therefore see the prey item. They can only see for a few inches in front of them, so it's not powerful, but it is, and it's pretty fascinating. There's more to this story because actually there are other spiders that have done something similar, but the morphology of the eye is very different. Okay, I'm sort of building up to one of my favorite stories in spider biology, and that is this. It's the ogre face spiders, sometimes called the net casting spiders. I'll show you why in a moment. These spiders are web building spiders. You can see on this picture on the right, they've got a weird little net that they build, and they sit right above, few inches above the ground or a surface like a leaf, and that's where they're just staring right there for any movement of a prey item that'll come there, and then they'll use this odd little web and uh, like casting a seine net, they will cast it over that prey item and gobble it up. Okay, I'm going to show you a video of this process. It's in sort of normal speed. Here it goes again. Yeah. It's incredible. All right, let's watch it in slow-mo. Kind of missed there, but picked it up on the backstroke. Look at that. Okay, so that's what these things are doing. That's why they're called net casting spiders. But that's not the story for today. That's not the reason that I'm talking about them. I'm talking about them because of these crazy huge modified eyes here. Remember, the wolf spiders, they've got a relatively normal or maybe slightly more sensitive retina, but they've got a mirror finish, and that's how they're able to see. These don't do that. These have an extremely sensitive retina, extremely sensitive light sensors in their eye. But you know what they don't have? Take a look at the eyes. Get it close there. They don't have eyelids. They're not able to close their eyes. So what happens, these spiders have eyes that are so sensitive that every morning when the sun rises, their eyes are scorched, burned to a crisp, destroyed, blinding the spider throughout the day. And the only way that they can perform this activity every night is by, as soon as the sun goes down, regenerating that eye tissue every night so that it can see and do this predatory behavior. Isn't that a crazy story? I just love that story. All right. My next story about eyes and vision adaptations that are in arthropods and bugs that live in the night comes from dung beetles. Dung beetles, despite the name and your maybe initial opinion of them, are fascinating. There's loads of different species. Even around here, there's lots of different species. And a really fun thing to do with your afternoon or Saturday morning is take the kids, go out to your favorite cow patty, and just start flipping cow patties or cow pasture and go start flipping cow patties looking for dung beetles. You'll see all kinds of cool things. There's invasive ones that are causing all kinds of problems for the native ones, and you can see all this happen in real time. Dung beetles are neat. There's loads of different kinds. Let's talk about some of them. So the dwellers are ones that live sort of with the dung patty and sort of stay with it, maybe burrowing down underneath, but sort of stay with the patty. Some people differentiate dwellers from tunnelers in that they burrow in the ground. What are they doing here? They're doing is that the adult beetles are arriving to this dung, and the dung is a really rich resource for their babies, their larvae. And so they're trying to make a space for their larvae. But the problem is that the competition is high. Flies love dung, other things love dung, and loads of dung beetles love dung. So they're in competition, fierce competition with each other on how to get to this dung. And the dwellers and the tunnelers are constantly battling it out. Well, there's a third type, the rollers. The rollers beat the system by just grabbing some of it and running away with it. They roll it up into a ball and bolt in as straight a line as possible so they can get away from the competition as fast as possible, and then bury it somewhere else. Yeah, so that's the strategy of rollers. Why am I talking about this? Well, it turns out that rollers, this little ball here, is also fiercely competed for. Other rollers want that ball, so they'll fight to get it. Other of these dwellers and tunnelers will also want that ball and try to fight for it. So they got to really make a beeline or a beetle line to get away from that dung patty. How do they do that? In order to do that, they have to navigate. And the problem is there's two different kinds of these rollers. There's day active ones and night active ones. And this is where the story gets interesting. Day active or diurnal dung beetles, they use the sun to navigate and plant a beeline path to get away from the dung patty. But night dwelling or nocturnal dung beetles, they can't use the sun. So they use the moon, right? Nope. They use the stars. It's fascinating, actually. They don't use all the stars. We've put these dung beetles in a planetarium and blotted out certain aspects of the night sky and found out exactly what they're using to navigate. And it turns out they're using the Milky Way. It's this one species that lives mostly in Europe and in Northern Africa. This is the only one we've tested, but one is enough to say a cool story. You can see some of the work here. Here is sort of the normal strategy where you put the dung beetle and the ball in the middle and then it just goes pew and just runs away. And you can change the orientation of it by changing the projection of the Milky Way. But what happens if you just blind the thing? Well, then it just goes all over the place. You can't do that. Yeah. And you can, again, change the planet sky uh, and answer more questions. Really cool story. Other animals use celestial objects to navigate, and the most famous of these is moths. Moths famously use the moon to navigate. Moths are principally flying at night, and almost all of them, I mean, there's many exceptions, but many moths have this basic behavior. The female is a little bit more stationary, and she emits a plume of pheromone to attract the male, and the male is more flighty and can travel far long distances to get to a female. And he does use that pheromone to track the female, but staying horizontal is a big deal. And so they have to navigate in some way just to fly around. And they do this by taking a glance at the moon and then just by habit, sort of calculating an angle and then flying in a certain angle with respect to that eyeball on the moon. That's how they're flying and keeping their orientation. And this works for the most part. We can actually take advantage of this as humans. So, for example, if you've ever been mothing, I love mothing. It's a wonderful activity. You can do it like this. You can get a light of various different kinds, put it up next to a sheet, don't catch it on fire, and you can attract all different kinds of moths to that sheet and learn a lot about insect biology. Very rarely, I'm sorry, I'm looking here at the photo here. Very rarely is it quite as exuberant of a catch as this. That's quite a sheet. Most of the time, or at least around here, it's not quite that awesome. The problem is, oh, let me say one more thing about this. Good practice is you put up the light and you're not out there all night. You put it up there during the time you're awake or you want to sample, and then you take the trap down or you turn the light off. Not all lights are like that, as it turns out. Many lights are left on all the time. And so what happens is the moth goes to that light exactly as it would the moon. And there's some science behind this about exactly why they do this sort of circling behavior around a light. It has to do with which eyes they're using to look at the moon and so forth. But basically, they're tricked by these lights into this death loop where they sort of get trapped in by artificial lights. Um, yeah, I love this artwork, by the way. It was from a paper in Nature Communications. Beautiful. The whole problem, though, is so what, right? They get trapped by the light, and then they're there, and but when the sun comes up, they can just fly away, right? Well, no, that's the whole problem. These are nocturnal animals, so these are creatures that really can only they only really know how to fly around when it's nighttime using this moon trick. These lights act as a sink where insects are attracted to these lights at night. The nocturnal insects that are not adapted for flying in the day are attracted to these lights at night. And then when the sun comes up, they don't really have great adaptations for escaping out of that and finding that tree to blend in with the bark or to find their host plant or something like that. They're not really able to do that easily. So they do it clumsily. And when they clumsily do that, they're susceptible to predators, in particular birds. These lights are a way to feed all of these insects to the birds. And I'd like to give that sort of image to you. I always feel bad for the moths trapped by lights like this. But many of you have probably heard of the great insect apocalypse. Or is it, am I saying it right? Insect apocalypse? Insect apocalypse? I don't know. For a long time now, we've been noticing this general insect decline. Numbers of insects across various groups are declining. And there's all different kinds of reasons for this. People are studying this. It's a hot topic for research right now. But I always wonder how much of this data is collected from flying insects And I've always wondered how much of a role light pollution plays to specifically insect declines. Some of that is studied. There have been papers on it, but there's a lot more research needed in order to be able to say anything conclusive on specifically that topic. All right, let's move away from sad things. Let's talk about some happy things. What about parasites? That always is a fun topic to say at the family dinner. Okay, this creature here is a mite. It is a face mite, sometimes called a follicle mite. Demodex is a genus of mites that are parasites, or better said, commensals on many different mammals. And we have our own species. In fact, we've got two species, and if you're lucky, you have both of them on you. But here is the most common species, Demodex folliculorum, the follicle mite or face mite. They live in the oily places all over your body, not just on your face. Despite what you may think, and despite what is prevalent on the internet, they do not cause any harm, and you can't get rid of them. There's no real way to get rid of them, despite what you find on the internet. Yes, they live with us. They live in our pores. They eat the sort of sebum and goop that our skin produces, and they just live there and totally harmless to us, living out a fairly normal life. It used to be thought that we humans, it was pretty rare to have these. Only a small percentage of us had them. Now we know with genetic data, 100% of adults have these living on our bodies. That's pretty exciting. I love the idea that I've got little friends. Part of the excitement that I have of knowing that this is on 100% of people is I know how exciting it is. Speaking of celestial objects, they have definitely visited the moon with us. In that picture is not just a human, that's a human and his commensal arachnids, the follicle mites. That's right. Mites were on the moon. First, of course. All right. Why am I talking about these in a night insect presentation? Well, I'll tell you. It turns out that these things don't have the genes for to monitor their own circadian rhythms. They use ours. And I've always wanted to rename these mites from follicle or face mite. I want to rename them Santa Claus mites. And I'll tell you why. Every night, these mites will leave the pores that they live in. They will crawl along the vast desert of the surface of your skin, find each other, mate, and then crawl back in the holes in order to get to be safe before you wake up. But how do they know? Well, it turns out they don't have genes to monitor their circadian rhythm. They use ours. This is why I want them to be called Santa Claus mites. They know when you've been sleeping. They know when you're awake. I bet they know when you've been bad or good. So be good for goodness sake. Santa Claus mites. Okay, I'm moving on. We've spent a lot of time now talking about vision, and I want to move to sound. It's just going to go black, so hopefully you can see me up here. Many insects in the darkness of night sing to each other. And I just want you to listen to this. You're one that's going common truncated. This one here. This is Eastern North American thing. But you hear this sound, and the setting is in, Lord of the Rings or Europe or something. They're trying to say somewhere else. No, this is an Eastern North American thing. And carefully, you can hear two different crickets that are down at the bottom. Yeah, so let's talk about these. This is common true katydid, and they are singing by rubbing their wings together in a method called stridulation. You can see that here. Common true katydid. Here's just what they sound like once more. Okay. And many katydids and crickets do this. Here's a black-legged katydid we have around here. You can see it using its wings to make this sound. Cool, right? Crickets will do this. They'll rub their wings together. This is one of my favorite examples, greater angle wing. This is a type of katydid. It's got an angle wing. Just going to show you. Hopefully this works. Okay. They make two different songs. One song is a zit call that is a defensive call toward other males. The other one is a rattle call for females. Zit call, zit call, rattle call for females. Yeah, pretty cool. So this feature is called stridulation. If you want to look that up, it's a word we use to talk about this rubbing to create sound quality. And many insects will do this. And a fun thing that I want to leave you with is that some insects will use tools to amplify this sound. So here's a katydid that is using a bowl-shaped leaf to amplify its stridulation. Here's a katydid that's chewed out a little part of a leaf, again, to amplify sound using the rest of the leaf. One of my favorite examples is mole crickets. Look how little their wings are. They can't make much noise, but actually you can hear them. They're pretty loud. And they're loud because they make this horn out of the dirt in their burrows with which to sing. Tool use in insects. Okay, so we've talked about vision, we've talked about sound. Now let's talk about moths. The rest of my talk today is about moths. Many of you are familiar with diurnal or daytime pollinators, bees, wasps, and the like. But what about the nocturnal pollinators, beetles and such? Moths are the most common and abundant of these nocturnal pollinators. And there's so many different kinds, and they have interesting coevolutionary relationships with flowers. I could talk more about this, but I'm not going to. But here you see a hawk moth with a long tongue and streaking nectar out of there. And eventually, many of these are pretty good pollinators of those flowers. My favorite story about this has to do with a study that was actually done at the University of Arkansas. This is a true armyworm moth, an adult, and it's feeding at a flower. It's pollinating this flower. This is apple. It turns out in this study, we found out that true armyworm is actually just as good, if not better, at pollinating at night the same flowers that are missed or poorly pollinated by honeybees during the day. Think about that. A moth, just as important of a pollinator as an imported farm animal like honeybees. Pretty neat. And by the way, true armyworm is a mega pest in agriculture. Uh, we spray the heck out of these things in order to control their numbers. But when they're adults, they're doing us a benefit by pollinating. Okay. Last story of the day has to do with a feature that moths have developed called an ear. Many different lineages of moth, many different types of moths have developed a tympanum, an ear, to hear specific frequencies. And the frequency that it listens to across all of these different kinds of moths flying around in the night is bats. These moths are trying to avoid bats by listening for the echolocation call of these bats. And when they hear that call, they'll drop out of the air. Sometimes certain moths have evolved like a radar jamming frequency that they'll sing back at the bat. But for the most part, most of them are just dropping out of the sky. And I think that's just so neat that you've got these night flying creatures that are adapting to these predators in a way, the same way across many different lineages. But actually, that's not the story I want to tell you about tonight. I want to talk more about mites. It turns out these moths, these ears, have their own mites. That's right. So, uh, there are many different kinds of mites that can invade and live exclusively in the ears of various different kinds of moths. Some of them will not destroy the tympanum, and in those species of mites, you find them occupying both ears of the moth. But in this genus, Dicricheles, they will only they destroy the tympanum, um, and they live in the caverns of that moth ear. Because of that, they only live in one of the ears. How do they know which ear to live in? Well, they when they get on the moth, they crawl down the body of the moth, and the first one chooses right or left. and it goes to that ear. The second mite that gets on the moth goes down the pheromone trail left by the first mite. And so they never pick the wrong ear. There's actually a lot more to the story, and I have a video associated with it. If we've got time, I'll come back to this slide at the end of the talk today, and I'll show you the video by David Attenborough. It's a wonderful video. David Attenborough, by the way, Sir David, he is almost 100 years old. Can you believe it? Here's the video, but I'm going to come back to this. Okay, so for now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to read from you a quote of this book, Mites of Moths and Butterflies. What a weird book. Can you imagine writing a book, Mites of Moths and Butterflies? How specific. And yet, most of this book is ear mites. And I love the way that Asher Treat writes. So let me read you this quote, and this will be my closing quote here. Okay. The next time a swooping bat snatches a choice moth from before your eyes, just as it is about to settle at your light, swallow the curse that was on your tongue and breathe a word of thanks to this blind marauder. Never mind that bats aren't blind, just between you and me. His voice, the bat, unheard by you, has called into being that marvel of form and sensitivity, the noctuid ear. It's the group of moths, noctuidae, and thus has made a home for some of the most fascinating creatures in the world of night. I love that quote. It's fantastic. Okay. With that, I would love to take any questions.
There are a couple of questions. Let's see.
Great.
Well, it starts with a comment.
Okay.
The person using the Quapaw Quarter United Methodist Church account says, we have been watching a hummingbird moth the past 2 nights in our yard. It likes the prairie phlox.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah, fantastic.
and then Lisa would like to know, are there tips for minimizing light disturbance for moths other than lights being off, such as color, downlight, intensity? Any suggestions there?
Yeah. Other than turning them off. Well, I'll first say that turning them off is the way. And that's what I really recommend. Um, it's true that various colors of lights uh, have less draw to various insects. And you can capitalize on this. We entomologists know what colors of lights certain groups are more attracted to, and we'll put that light out when we want that group. Blue lights for certain, yellow lights for others, and so forth. Um, and I think it's true that yellow lights are less attractive by most insects. Dim lights will attract, um, it's not necessarily less, it's not necessarily fewer insects. It's insects from a tighter radius around that. Most of the visually tuned navigators are going to be attracted to the light no matter how dim. Um, well, I say no matter how dim. It's in competition with the moon, I suppose. Um, yeah, so yellow, dim, and off are tips. Yeah, I hope that answers that question.
Okay, here is a question from Denise. She says, are the mites shown larval? Am I pronouncing that right?
Great. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So that's such a good question. I well, actually, no, the video doesn't cover it. So the life stages of the mites, they have a larval stage, they got three nymphal stages, and then the adult phase. So that's what is that? Larva, three nymphs, and adult. So that's five stages. In the ear of the moth is all of those stages except for one. So one stage is the second nymphal stage, what we call deutonymph. And the deutonymph have super long legs and they're really fast and they live in flowers. So what's going on is the moth um, goes to drink at a flower, and this is the video I hope to show later. They go to drink at a flower, and that fast running mite will run up the tongue of the moth and then go down its back and choose right or left. Uh, and then the moth will go to other flowers and pick up other mites for that same reason. The
Okay.
mites will develop inside the ear, and then when the nymph comes out, it'll run back down the tongue in order to get back on the flower. Pretty cool.
She clarified she meant the face mites and not the
Oh,
not moth ear mites. So
excuse
face,
me.
she'd like to know if those are larval.
No,
She did say that at first, so yeah.
all life stages live on your body, live in your pores. It's not a larval. They're not using you just for a larval phase. It's all stages of the mite live all up in your face.
So yes, Denise, you have those on your face.
And yes, Denise, you specifically have them on your face. 100% of adults ever tested. We now know this because we use swabs to test genetics. It's fascinating.
That makes sense. Yeah. How many species of spiders swing their webs like a trampoline?
How many species are in the family Dinopody? Might be what that question is asking. Um, yeah, how many species are there in Dinopody? I don't know that off the top of my head. It's not a large family, so you're not looking at thousands. You're probably looking at hundreds. And if it is a thousand, it's around a thousand. So it's not actually a very large family. It is worth saying though, something I didn't mention in the beginning of the talk. You know, this series has four presentations in it, and the other three cover vertebrates. And I mean, the totality of all vertebrate species. There's only 10,000 species of birds. There are families of arthropods that have over 100,000 species. Um, Families, not even counting the orders. And there's many of them. So we're talking about, you know, many millions of species of arthropods, most of them nocturnal, versus, you know, less than 70,000 of all vertebrates.
We have another question about webs. Lisa says, why do we, or asks, why do we notice more webs in the fall?
Oh, such a good question. I love that question. We notice that for two reasons. One, we're big. Two, the spiders are old. So turns out most spiders are present throughout the year, and you'll see the webs if you look for them. They're just small, and you got to know where to look. But we're big creatures lumbering around, and so we really most of the time only notice those webs that are the large web building spiders. And the second reason is they're old. Those species tend to be seasonal. They're really only living for 1 year. They'll die at the first freeze for the most part. Their egg sac will persist across the winter, and then they'll emerge as babies, live throughout the year, and then finally reach adulthood where they can make the big, beautiful web that they were always born to make there in the late fall for us to run our face into on the trail.
Okay, I can't resist this one. Austin says, this
Austin.
was mighty interesting. Um,
Thank you, Austin.
how do ear mites impact a moth's ability to avoid predators?
Yeah. Oh, so um the mo the again there's certain mites that don't damage the tympanum, and so they can live in both ears and the moth is fine. But the mites that damage the tympanum can only live in one ear, specifically to leave the other one so that the moth can hear the bats, and still avoid bats. Otherwise, they get eaten by the moth. But there's this great story in certain part of New Zealand, I think it's Hawke's Bay, bats almost went extinct there or did go extinct there. And people researching moths started noticing that these mites that ate both tympana, or sorry, mites that destroyed a tympanum were found in both ears because there were no bats there. Conservation efforts started reintroducing bats, and now the moths have one ear damaged by those same mites. So there's a lot of selection pressure on making sure only one ear is damaged.
Interesting. Okay, so we've got a couple more questions, but we need to get to
We need
Pam.
to get to
So
play.
I have got those questions kind of earmarked.
Sounds good.
We're talking about ears and mites and all kinds of things, but earmarked so that we can get those after Pam's presentation.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Ray. We'll see you in a minute. Let's see. Well, oh, there you go. There, Pam. Yay.
Hi.
Okay, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. That was a great talk from Ray, and I learned so much about some of those nocturnal insects. And I'm here to talk about one specific one. Let me just share my screen here. Give me a second. All right, I'm going to talk about mysterious and magical fireflies. So this is an insect that we also see at night. And I'll probably take about 10 minutes. And there's so much to learn about fireflies. I'm going to have some books at the end so you can learn more on your own time, but I'll go through some of the most interesting facts that I found. So I got interested in fireflies a few years ago because I moved to Arkansas and I'm really interested in gardening and native plants. And I was planting a new yard full of native plants specifically for butterflies and birds and other critters. And I saw some fireflies one evening, and that got me thinking, what should I be planting in my garden to attract fireflies? And once I started researching, I just couldn't stop. They were just really, really interesting. And I'm here to share some of the interesting facts with you. So this is a picture of a firefly that I took in my garden. And here is my spark question, if you will, on that got me interested in fireflies. How do I track fireflies in my yard? So to learn the answer to this question, we need to go back a little bit and learn about the firefly life cycle. So fireflies, not many people know about them, even though a lot of people absolutely love them. So I'm going to tell you some basic facts. The firefly is a type of a beetle. And like all beetles, it goes through 4 life stages: the egg, the larva, the pupa, and the adult. Similar to a butterfly is not a beetle, but it has those same 4 life stages. A firefly spends about 2 to 3 weeks as an egg, and then as a larva, it can spend up to 2 years in this life stage as a larva. And here is a little larva picture that I took when I went to the Dark Sky Festival a couple years ago on the Buffalo River. So this is what a larva looks like of a particular species. So 2 years, up to 2 years as a larva, and then 1 to 3 weeks as a pupa, and then 3 to 4 weeks as an adult. And this might be really surprising to a lot of people because we only see fireflies as adults. So because this is the only stage we see them at, we kind of, I don't know, assume that's the only time they're around is when they're adults, but they actually spend most of their lives as a larva. And when they're larvae, they eat slugs, snails, and worms. They spend all this time just growing and growing, bigger and bigger. And some species live in the leaf litter and some live under the soil. There are some aquatic larvae, but we don't have any of those in Arkansas. And then, so adults, what do adults eat? Adults, most species eat absolutely nothing. So at this point, when I was researching, I realized, okay, there aren't really any plants I could be planting because the larvae aren't like butterflies and caterpillars. They don't eat leaves. The adult fireflies typically don't nectar on flowers, but there's still a lot that you can do in your garden for fireflies. So here's my little firefly again. And this one is actually called the Big Dipper firefly or the common eastern firefly, Photinus piralis. And I was surprised to learn that there's more than one species of firefly. Those of you who know insects maybe think that's kind of obvious, but I really somehow only had in my mind that there's just a firefly. But there are actually over 2,000 species of firefly in the world, about 150 species in the US, and there are about 30 species in Arkansas. And I say about 30 because we really don't know exactly how many species there are. There are 30 that have been identified, but a lot of those were seen many, many years ago and haven't been really recorded or observed since. And then there could be some species out there that we really haven't named or described. People don't know a lot about fireflies, partly because they're active at night and not many people are out there looking around at night. Not the only firefly species. So fireflies can be grouped into 3 different types. There are the flashing fireflies. These are the ones that we see flashing at night, also called lightning bugs down here in the south. The adults flash, and the reason they flash is to attract a mate. The one we're seeing flying around flashing in the sky, that's typically the male. And if you look really carefully, you can see the female responding, but they're typically down low in the grass or on the ground. And within the flashing fireflies, here in Arkansas, we have 3 major groups: the Photinus genus, the Photurus genus, and the Pyractomina genus. And they're all a little bit different. There are also day-active fireflies. So these are ones that are active during the day and they don't have any lights. What defines a firefly isn't that it flashes as an adult, but that it glows as a larva. So all of these fireflies, even though they don't have lanterns and they don't flash during the day, they're still fireflies because they glow as larvae. And this is a winter firefly. You can see this in the winter. Little tiny flower elf. I have a bunch of these in my garden now that I started looking for them. Black firefly, and this one is called a silent firefly, which looks a lot like the Big Dipper, but doesn't have any lanterns. And then finally, the 3rd group is the glowing fireflies. They are active at night and they glow, they don't flash. This one is a shadow ghost, and this is the male, and he actually doesn't have any lanterns. It's the female that glows. And this is not a larva, this is actually a female. So you can probably tell that she does not fly at all. The male will fly around looking for the female who is glowing in the grass or on the ground. So you might be saying, after looking at those pictures, that they pretty much all look the same. They're all kind of black with some red and yellow. So how do we tell them apart? There are a few clues. One is to look at the habitat. Different species live in different types of habitat. Another way is to think about what month it is and what time of night. Different species are active in the spring, some are in the summer. And then time of night, the one we're familiar with, the Big Dipper, is active while it's still a little bit light around dusk. That's why that's the one that most of us are familiar with, is because we're still out and about and we see it. But most species are active way after dark, so about an hour or so after sunset. It could be 9 or 10 o'clock in the summer. The main way you can tell different species apart is through their flash patterns. And by flash pattern, I just mean they flash, and sometimes there's a different number of seconds in between each flash. Sometimes it's more than one flash at a time. And what you do is you look for one firefly and try to follow it and count the seconds in between the flashes. And here's just a kind of little mock-up that I made. This is the Big Dipper. And it's called the Big Dipper because it flashes in kind of a J flashing dip shape. And then that's the female that responded. And in about 4 seconds, another one will flash. Not in my slide, but in real life it will. Another example is the cattail flash train firefly. So this one has kind of a flash train. You might have seen that. And then the female responds by blinking twice in the vegetation. So you might have seen on the month slide that April was mentioned. And you're probably thinking it's too early for fireflies. But in fact, there are fireflies out and about right now in April. So I don't have a lot of time. I'm just gonna quickly show you this. These are the flashing fireflies that you might be seeing in April. The most common one is the spring treetop flasher. If you go out in the woods, an area where it's really dark and there's no light pollution, you might look up at the treetops and see them blinking once, and then about 2 to 3 seconds of darkness, and then another blink. They're quite common, so you'll probably see them if you go out into the woods. And then here are some other ones that aren't as common, and you can see from these little diagrams the different flash patterns, how they all have very different flash patterns. There are also our 2 species of glow fireflies, should be active now here in April, although I've never seen any. So if anybody sees one, please let me know. I would really love to go see them. They should be out in the woods. And like I said, the females will glow from the vegetation, and the males of the shadow ghost don't have any lanterns, but the luminous ghost, the male, is supposed to have lanterns, but we really don't know much about them. So that's why this is blank. And then there are a couple of day active fireflies that you might see. It's getting a little late in the season for winter fireflies, but you might still see some. And it's a little early for the flower elves, but again, you still might see some. So my original question was, what can I do in my yard to attract fireflies? So I'm going to quickly go through how to make a place glow with fireflies. And you can just remember the acronym GLOWS. G stands for let the grass grow long and plant native trees and shrubs. And long grass and native trees and shrubs is important for a couple reasons. Like I said, the male is flashing up in the sky, but the female is perched on tall grass or low vegetation, so the male can see her. If you have really short cropped grass, then the male won't be able to see the female. And during the day, when the fireflies aren't active, they need some place to shelter, and that's why it's important to have this undisturbed vegetation for them. L stands for leave the leaves and logs for the ground-dwelling larvae. I mentioned that the larvae live in the leaf litter or under the soil, and they're also eating the slugs and the snails and the worms, which also live in the leaf litter. And the firefly is a larva for up to 2 years. So people are always asking me, when can I clean up my leaves? And for fireflies, the answer is actually never. So you really need to have some area of your yard where everything stays undisturbed year round, because those larvae aren't going to magically transform into fireflies in the summer every year. O is for organic, because pesticides are going to kill fireflies because they are insects. W is for something wet and watery. Not only is a wet space important for the slugs and the snails, fireflies, some species of fireflies are really only found near streams and ponds. But in your yard, a shady area that stays a little bit damp enough to support worms and slugs and snails is pretty much all you need for some species. And then the last one, the S, is the one that's really important: stop the lights for dark skies. Ray mentioned the insect apocalypse, how a lot of insects are disappearing, and it's no different for fireflies. Habitat loss is one reason, insecticides is another, and light pollution is a big one. There are just not as many dark places anymore, and having a really dark sky is important for the male and the female to be able to see each other to find a mate. If there's too much light, they're not going to be able to successfully find a mate. All right, well, that's all I have for you today. But if you want to learn more about fireflies, I have just barely scratched the surface of these really interesting insects. There are a couple really good books, and when I say a couple of good books, I mean the only books that you'll be able to find on fireflies: Silent Sparks, and this is more of a field guide: Fireflies, Glowworms, and Lightning Bugs. And you can join our Arkansas Firefly Facebook group, and I try to post stuff regularly to help you learn more about fireflies, and you can also share your firefly sightings. So thanks a lot. And here is my email if you want to send me some more questions about fireflies or some interesting sightings that you might have.
Thank you, Pam. I will get those book titles and add them to a list that I'm creating to go along with this program. Um, it's mainly so that people with Cowell's library cards could check out books, but anybody can view the list and see what we have.
I hope you have those books.
I hope so too. If not, I think I know who to ask to buy them for the
Excellent.
library.
That's great.
That was great. I really think that lightning bugs, along with katydids, have very fond memories. I mean, at least for me as a child, running around and seeing them and catching them and putting them in containers occasionally. We've all done that, I think. But and hearing katydids out in, I used to say for a long time that I couldn't fall asleep at my grandmother's house if it was too quiet, and the katydids always helped with that. So um, we have one question from Denise who says, I think she was referring to the female that kind of looked in an odd shape. I was going to say like a taco. It wasn't really a taco, but is that a glowworm?
So some people use glowworm to refer to the larva of all species because, like I said, the larvae do glow. And when I was at the Dark Sky Festival, they along the river, a creek near the Buffalo River, there's just glowing larvae everywhere. So that was the first time I'd ever seen that. It's really cool. So if you're out in the woods, you can probably find a spot, usually near a river or a creek, that in the fall you'll see the larva glowing. And some people call the glowing adults, the larva one in the picture, larva form female. Some people call those glowworms as well. So it's either the larva or the glowing firefly.
Denise says that I guess the Buffalo River is where she saw them
Oh,
first
cool.
as
Yeah,
well. So
cool.
yes, and I've put the link to your Facebook group also in the chat for folks who are on their phones and can't use the QR code. I dropped that in the chat. But yeah, I mean, I think was you said you didn't know there were more. I thought a firefly was a firefly. And that first one you showed, the Big Dipper, I mean, that looks like the ones we caught as kids, right? So that is fascinating. If anybody wants to type some more questions in the chat, you're welcome to. We could ask Ray to join us and work on some of those questions while we get other questions from the chat. Okay, let me find my document. There we go, where I earmarked the questions. Ray, if you'll unmute yourself. Okay, so do moth ear mites affect the way the moth perceives bat sounds?
They do if they were to take out both ears. So if they take out both, it's just that tympanum that allows the moth to hear bats. So when the mites destroy one of those tympana, and by the way, they're doing that, they chew through the tympanum because let's see, how do I do this? Maybe I'll do it with my hands. Let's see if I can do it with my hands. Let's say this is the outside of the moth. This is the inside of the moth, and that's the air, right? Okay. So a mite will go into the moth and immediately, in a short distance, encounter that tympanum.
Okay.
So they have to bore through that tympanum to get to this cavernous area with many different chambers that's kind of deep inside the moth body. And different parts of those chambers will be used for different reasons and different growth chambers of the mites. That's why they're accessing the chambers. When they destroy them tympanum, that ear is no longer functional. But the other ear is fine, and that's the reason for this evolution of the trail marking pheromone, where they only pick the one ear, except when there's no bats. If you go destroy the bats in an area, then there's no more selection pressure to make sure that the moth can hear. And so the mites can actually bore into either ear until you introduce bats again and then re-evolve the whole system.
Okay. Pam, there's a question. Do we know the science behind why fireflies glow?
Yeah, so why they glow or why they flash is to find a mate, but maybe how they glow is the question. There's certain compounds in their body. There's an enzyme called luciferase and a substance called luciferin, and then ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate, which is present in all living things. You might remember it from biology class, and oxygen. So when all of those elements, I think there's another one, maybe potassium or something. When all of those elements are present, the firefly can flash, and it's not completely certain why or how some of them have different flash patterns. But what's interesting is that scientists have taken the luciferin and the luciferase and used that in a lot of different scientific research. They make it synthetically now, but they used to capture millions of fireflies and harvest these chemicals. And they use them for testing cures for cancer and testing to see if food has gone bad. And what they do is they put these chemicals in something. And if ATP is present, and again, I said ATP is present in all living things, if there's a bad microbe for bad food, if that's present, it will light up. If you have not been able to kill the cancer tumor, then it will light up. So they test cancer drugs. Cancer drug works, everything's dead, doesn't light up. Tumor still active, it lights up. So fireflies are really important for scientific research.
But they've been able to synthesize that or make it synthetic, so they don't.
Yeah, back in the 60s through the 80s in the US, actually here in the Midwest, a company based in Missouri, um, put ads in newspapers to try and get kids like scout groups and church groups to capture fireflies and mail them in. And they killed millions of fireflies and sent them into this science company. It was called the Sigma Firefly Club. But thank goodness that's not happening anymore.
Yes. I mean, I may have caught a few, but not millions. Wow. Um, let's see, Ray. Oh, wait, I have a question. Okay, Ray, that nocturnal pollinators picture that you showed, there were lots of flying things, but there was also a crawling thing, a rat or a mouse or something as a pollinator.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You want
Yes,
to talk about
yes.
that?
Sure.
I know it's
Um,
outside of your wheelhouse, but I didn't
yeah,
notice
yeah.
that.
And to be fair, I'm not completely confident I'm speaking about that exact image. I'm just remembering it. I did not paint that. I
Okay.
would love to have painted it. But I'm pretty sure that is a possum, a type of what they call
Oh,
honey possum.
okay.
And this is a rat-like
Somehow in
looking.
my mind, that's better than a rat.
Rats are cool too. I'm sure there's plenty of things that pollinate. There's lizards that pollinate. Um, all kinds of stuff can pollinate, and it's not just flowers too. But that one, honey possums are tiny little things, and they can crawl up flowers and do the same thing that moths and other things do. Bats as well. Bats are great pollinators, um, especially for things like saguaro cacti and stuff like that.
Okay, cool. So it was really small. I mean, I guess I didn't think
It's
about the
tiny,
scale. I just
tiny.
saw small, hairy thing with long tail.
Little
And
rat. Gotta
yes,
ask.
well, yes. Okay, here's a question. How many species of insects in Arkansas migrate?
How many? Well, I definitely don't have a number for you for more than one reason. No one does. We are at the absolute beginning of our understanding as a civilization of understanding migration in insects. Um, we pull out new ones all the time. Classic examples include things like monarch butterflies. There's a dragonfly called a globe skimmer. Painted butterflies are good migrants. The armyworm that I showed earlier, the pest that pollinated apples, they migrate as well. But uh, My favorite example is one of my favorite insects. It's black saddlebags dragonflies. By the way, green darner dragonflies migrate too. But black saddlebags dragonflies are the ones, they have these huge broad wings. They rarely flap. They soar a lot. And to do that, they do what birds do. They will look for thermals, heat rising from the earth. And they love parking lots for that reason. As a result, if you're ever going from your car across the parking lot into the store, look up and you'll see black saddlebags dragonflies. And almost all of them are migratory. They emerged down south and then flew up north. Um, but there's boatloads of examples. We don't have exact numbers because we're on the edge of studying it, but I can say the dominant migrators, the dominant migrating groups of insects are certain moths, certain butterflies. I guess butterflies are moths, but certain moths, uh, certain dragonflies, and actually, that might be all of our understanding. It may be right now, just scanning my mind, I can't think of an example that's not a moth or a dragonfly. So that might be the only groups that we know of at the moment.
One last question. What is that cellar spider on my ceiling sustaining itself on all winter? And I agree. I did not ask that question, but I'm with you on that one.
All righty. Well, that's a great question. So around here, cellar spiders, we actually there are native cellar spiders. The name cellar spider inappropriately applies to a family of spiders with thousands of species. And in that group, there actually are native members here, but they're not the ones in houses. So the ones in houses are just a few species we call cellar spiders because they're common in cellars. And they're the things that make the cobwebby, flimsy kind of webbing that hangs from ceilings. Um, yeah. So the interesting thing to say about cellar spiders is number one, if you were to take that spider and throw it outside, it would die. They can't survive in the summer. They can't survive in the winter. They're not built for here. They're built for like caves. They live in like, I mean, not caves, but like cool, dark, damp kind of areas. We modified cavemen build our own caves, which long ago were natural, and now we've learned how to build them by ourselves, kind of like mud daubers. And they basically it's a species that lives in Europe that is a cave adapted cellar spider. And we just transported around our own little huts that we call houses and buildings. It's only for us. They only live in our homes. And what do they eat? They eat the bugs that we have in our house. Most of the time, those are things like cockroaches, flies, and mosquitoes, but they can be other spiders and everything else under the sun too. They are carefully adapted for human existence. The populations that have been living with us for a long time behave differently than the wild populations. And so we're evolving our own little commensal arthropod in real time. I love cellar spiders. They're super cool. Um, yeah, more to say about it, but I'll stop there.
Well, thank you. Thank you both so much for being here. I know I learned a lot. I'm sure other people did too. Um, this is the third in the 4-week series, like I mentioned before. And so next Monday, we're going to have Bruce and Philip McMath talk about human harms and solutions for nature at night. So we'll see everybody next week.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.